Story 1. It started as a typical trip to the countryside. A group of 7th graders from Jefferson Middle School boarded a yellow bus, excited for their weekend at a nature lodge deep in the forest. But as they approached the lodge, something felt off. The air seemed colder than it should have been for late spring, and the bus driver, a normally cheerful man named Mr. Peterson, refused to step out of the bus once they arrived. "I'll wait here until you're all ready to leave," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously at the shadowy woods surrounding the lodge. The lodge itself was old, too old. Its creaky floors and dusty wooden beams hinted at decades of decay. But what really unsettled the students and their teacher, Miss Carter, was the room on the 3rd floor. When Sarah, one of the more curious students, tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. A faded sign hung crookedly from the handle reading "Do Not Enter." Of course, that only made Sarah want to see what was inside. "It's probably just storage," Miss Carter said when Sarah asked about it. But Sarah swore she heard noises, soft tapping, almost like footsteps, coming from behind the door that night. The first night, strange things began happening. The lights flickered constantly, even though the lodge supposedly had been renovated a year ago. One student, Marcus, woke up screaming after feeling someone or something grab his ankle. But when they turned on the lights, there was no one there, and his bed was too far from the others for it to have been a prank. By the second night, the students were too scared to sleep. That's when Sarah and her friend Jenny decided to sneak upstairs and investigate the locked room. They managed to pick the lock using a hairpin, but what they found inside was far worse than they imagined. The room was filled with children's drawings, dozens of them pinned to the walls. Each one depicted a small, shadowy figure standing in the same lodge room. In the corner of the room stood an antique rocking chair, rocking back and forth on its own. "We need to go," Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. But before they could leave, the door slammed shut behind them. The rocking chair stopped, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. The girls screamed, pounding on the door until Miss Carter and the other students came running. But when the door was opened, the room was empty. The drawings were gone, and the rocking chair stood motionless. The group packed up and left the lodge at dawn, cutting the trip short. To this day, Sarah swears she saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring at her from the lodge window as they drove away. Story 2. A summer field trip to a state park should have been the highlight of the year for the students at Westwood High. They'd been looking forward to 2 days of hiking, swimming, and roasting marshmallows under the stars. But no one expected that one of them wouldn't make it back. The group arrived at the campsite, a sprawling area surrounded by dense woods. The teachers, Mr. Lopez and Miss Grant, divided the students into teams to set up tents and gather firewood. Among the students was a boy named Tyler, quiet, a little shy, but well-liked by everyone. That evening, as the group sat around the campfire, Tyler wandered off to use the restroom. When 10 minutes passed and he hadn't returned, his best friend Jake started to worry. "He probably got lost," Jake said, grabbing a flashlight. But when the group searched the area, Tyler was nowhere to be found. The teachers contacted park rangers, and a full-scale search began. Hours turned into a day, and there was still no sign of Tyler. But Jake swore he saw something strange the night Tyler disappeared. A tall, pale figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching them. "I thought it was a tree at first," Jake said, "but then it moved." 2 days into the search, Jake and another student, Emma, decided to take matters into their own hands. They ventured deeper into the woods, following what Jake claimed were faint footprints. Eventually, they stumbled upon an old cabin. Inside, they found scratch marks on the walls and a single torn shoe that belonged to Tyler. But before they could investigate further, they heard heavy footsteps approaching. They hid under a rotting bed frame as the door creaked open. The figure that entered was impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. It sniffed the air, muttering something unintelligible before leaving the cabin. Jake and Emma ran as fast as they could back to the campsite. Tyler was never found, but after that night, strange claw marks appeared on the tents and low growls echoed through the woods. The group left the park the next morning and the campsite was closed indefinitely. Story 3. A group of high school students were on their way back from a museum trip when their bus broke down in the middle of a rural road. It was past sunset and the only light came from the bus's dim headlights. "It's just a flat tire," the driver said. "We'll be back on the road in no time." But an hour passed and there was no sign of help. The teacher, Mr. Harris, decided to call for assistance, but his phone had no signal. Nearby, the students spotted a large, abandoned house. It looked like something out of a horror movie, with broken windows and ivy crawling up its walls. A few of the braver students decided to check it out, hoping to find a landline phone. But inside, they found something else entirely. Photographs of school buses, hundreds of them pinned to the walls. Each one showed a different bus, some with students still sitting inside, their faces blurred or distorted. As the night wore on, strange things began happening. One student claimed they saw a figure standing in the road, staring at the bus. Another said they heard whispers coming from the abandoned house, even though no one else was inside. By midnight, everyone was on edge. That's when the bus engine suddenly roared to life on its own. When the students and teachers boarded the bus, they realized something was wrong. The air felt icy and the seats in the back were wet, as though someone, or something, had been sitting there. As the bus drove off, one student glanced out the window and screamed. The abandoned house was gone, replaced by a cemetery, and in the reflection of the bus windows, shadowy figures sat in every seat, staring straight ahead. The bus eventually made it back to the school, but the students were never the same. Years later, one of them claimed they found an old newspaper article about a school bus that had crashed on that same road decades earlier. All the students on board had died, and some say late at night you can still see their bus driving aimlessly down that lonely road. Field trips are meant to be a time of adventure and learning, but for the people in these stories, they became something far more sinister. Whether it's haunted lodges, mysterious disappearances, or ghostly buses, these tales remind us that sometimes the scariest lessons happen outside the classroom. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, or if you have a terrifying tale of your own, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling content. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.